What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here at Mercedes-Benz Superdome. The Eagles season is over. They lost 20-14 the New Orleans Saints in a heartbreaking fashion. We'll get into that. Mike K, as we talked about in the last episode, he's not here, but we have a familiar voice, Matt Lombardo, filling in as Mike deals with some baby-related things. He has a baby coming, but the season's over. It was a weird game. It felt like the Eagles were going to win it that first quarter. You jump out 14-0 in the Saints' house. You think they're going to win, but it didn't really pan out that way.
Yeah, really, Zach. And you look at the first quarter of the game, and first of all, glad to be here with you.
Yeah,
it's fun to be back
Happy to have you back on the no-huddle show.
It's great. But you look at the first quarter of the game, and Nick Foles starts out, couldn't be any better. 7 for 7. He has the touchdown pass, the deep ball down the field to Jordan Matthews, and it looks like the Eagles are going to be off and running. They jump out to a 14-0 start, and then all of a sudden, Marshawn Lattimore picks off Foles with 13:45 remaining in the second quarter, and it's almost as if the Nick Foles that led the Eagles to the Super Bowl title last year, the Nick Foles that led them on a 4-game winning streak just to make the postseason, and survived and led them on a game-winning drive last week against the Bears. After that pick, he morphed into the Nick Foles we saw with the St. Louis Rams and the Kansas City Chiefs, and the offense didn't score again. Foles struggled moving the ball downfield the rest of the way, and the Eagles just never recovered, and that really felt like a turning moment, and I can't tell you how many times you and I looked at each other and said, it just feels like this thing is ready to explode. Saints go off on a 17-0 run, and they lose the game 20-14.
Yeah, we'll get into some of the key moments, but I think it's important that we start at the end. The most important, maybe not the most important moment, but the game ended here. So, Alshon Jeffrey, who was having a pretty good game, he had a few really impressive catches. His bond with Nick Foles has been very evident in the last few weeks. They've been really good together, and this is a dude that you throw it up to him, he's going to go and get it.
Yep.
You and I both
drops all year.
You and I both got called out by freezing cold takes because we complimented him. Yours was from a long time ago.
Mine was training camp of 2017.
Mine was from today, where I said his catch radius is a mile.
Yeah.
So as it turns out, Foles, they're going down the field. The Eagles are trailing by 6. They get the ball back because Will Lutz missed a field goal. The Eagles getting a chance because the kicker missed a field goal again. And they're going up the field. Nick Foles has an open Alshon in the middle of the field. He throws it to him. Alshon puts his hands up. It hits his hands, flies up. Marshawn Lattimore intercepts it. Alshon Jeffrey just laid on the turf there for a while. He had a few teammates come up to him, including Nick Foles, Zack, Jordan Matthews. Jason Kelsey was over there. And these guys, Nick Foles especially, pulled him aside. He talked to him. You were. This was you were in the locker room with Alshon. This is a guy who is as respected as anybody in that locker room. They don't win the Super Bowl last year without him. No. A couple of those touchdowns he had were remarkable.
I don't know that they make the postseason this year without him.
The way he played at the end of the year.
He had against the Rams, a couple really big catches there, and if I remember, he had a monster game against the Houston Texans to kind of keep the playoff.
He changes everything about this offense and. Okay, that's all a long way of saying, and the reality was his drop is what wound up costing them the game. Who knows if they would have scored on that drive, but they didn't get a chance. That was the end of the game.
And let's be clear, they didn't lose the game.
Yes. So we're gonna get into all of that.
Alshon Jeffrey's drop.
Yes, exactly. Which is the point all his teammates said in the locker room. Yep. But you were at the locker room, Alshon. He's a guy who's not the most talkative guy generally, I should say, like to set the scene. And he sometimes doesn't even want to talk to the media after games, but he sat by his locker. I know somebody asked him something along the lines of, like, why are you sitting by your locker?
You were over there. The NFL Network asked him point blank, you could have walked out of here. Why are you still sitting at your locker here 25 minutes after the game answering all these questions? And he said, I'm human. At the end of the day, I'm human like everybody else, and sometimes you just have to answer the tough questions. And I give him a lot of credit for that because that's a really tough moment. I mean, here's a guy that last year, as you said, was a catalyst to the Super Bowl run. He was a big part of their offense, particularly down the stretch this year. And one drop is going to be what a lot of fans, unfortunately, remember and point to from this game. But you talked to Jason Kelsey after the game, and he said that he first wanted to go over and just check on him to make sure that he wasn't hurt on that last play because he kind of laid there, and he realized for a second that, no, he wasn't hurt, he was just disappointed. But I know that Lane Johnson talked to you guys and revealed something a little different. This
just came out a little while ago. So Lane Johnson, when he was talking to reporters, revealed something that Alshon didn't go out his way to say because he's not that type of guy. Remember, this is a guy who played with a torn rotator cuff all of last season. Correct. He chose not to get shoulder surgery. Nobody even found that out until after the season was over. So Lane Johnson says he was playing with cracked ribs.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah, this dude, like his toughness, man, it's unreal, and he's he's going to be here for a long time. He's their number one wide receiver. I know his numbers maybe don't look like that, but he just makes such an impact. And just the way, even Zach Ertz said, he just went down the line. He's like, A, Alshon Jeffrey didn't lose us this game.
Right.
B, we would have thrown that. We would have done that play 100 times, and he probably would have caught them 99 times. And we don't regret going to him. We want to go to him. He's the reason why we're here. We wouldn't, Nick Foles and him. I mentioned this. They have like a special bond, those two guys. And Mike and I have talked about this a lot. I don't know what it is, but they have a better bond than him and Carson Wentz do. At least it looks like that on the field.
I think that when you watch, and I might have even tweeted this during the game, and I know I brought it up to you, that Alshon Jeffrey and Nick Foles have a really similar connection to what you see with Carson Wentz and Zach Ertz. The connection from quarterback to target is very similar. And, not to just dwell on that one play, but if that's an incomplete pass or if he catches the ball there and the drive is alive, who knows what happens? Foles could have thrown an interception 3 plays later. He was having that kind of day.
Yep.
They could have gone 3 and out. They only had 2 first downs from the point of the interception all through the third quarter. This wasn't an offense, Zach, outside of that one drive when Alshon had that
one
drop
catch
that led to the interception. This was not an offense that was functioning. They were going 3 and out, and at the same time, you had Drew Brees and the Saints marching down the field, and they just dominated time of possession. I think the Eagles only had the ball 2 times in the entire third quarter. So that play was big. It ended their real competitive chances at winning the game, but that game was lost way before.
That's a good segue. I think we should go into the moments that led to their season ending today.
Yep.
So, like you said, the first quarter, they came out, and I thought, this feels like the Vikings. And Crevon LeBlanc had an interception on the first play of the game. Like, this dude, he had some great plays throughout the game, while the defense was slowing down.
From Sean Payton and Drew Brees to try and air it out on the very first play, and LeBlanc makes a great play on the ball and intercepts it.
Yes, and Nick Foles, he was perfect. They were catching everything. The defense was shutting down the Saints' offense. I think they had, 13 yards after the first quarter, while the Eagles had over 100, and then everything changed. And
Yep.
You want the big moment,
the block punt,
or the fake punt,
or the fake punt rather. That was, and it was set up by the interception.
There's a setup. Yeah. So what happened was on third and 1, I believe the Eagles stuffed Mark Ingram for no gain.
Yep.
And Ryan Ramczyk, the right tackle, or is he left?
Left tackle.
Left tackle. He's really good.
Yeah.
He was called for holding, and Doug. We're going to criticize this in a second because I think it was the wrong decision just based on the Saints' history. But he decided to decline the penalty, take the 4th down, thinking they would punt it.
4th and 1.
4th and 1. The Saints, again, you covered this game. Against the Giants, Taysom Hill is like a jack of all trades.
Yep.
They did a fake punt. He threw it. It worked.
Yeah. The team that I now cover every day and every week, the New York Giants, had the exact same thing happen to them in the second quarter of the game at MetLife Stadium.
So Taysom Hill ran for a first down on that.
And next thing you know, it was a 33-18 blowout win in a game where the Giants were still alive in that game. So you think about today, it's 4th and 1, and the Saints do the same thing. They convert, and they get the first down, and that's the same play that Fletcher Cox got hurt on.
Which was impactful because he didn't play the rest of that drive. I think he might even miss the next drive. He left later in the game again with the same foot injury.
Yep.
He had a boot on his foot in the locker room. But
you could tell that not only how dominant Fletcher Cox had been when he was in there, because that first quarter he was just living in the backfield, whether it was pressuring Drew Brees, tackles for losses, pushing the offensive lineman into the pocket. Cox, it was really difficult to even, keep him out of the backfield. But he goes out, and in the span when he was out of the game, you look at Alvin Kamara, a run of 6 yards, a run of 13 yards, a run of 20 yards, a run of 17 yards. They just exploited Cox's absence, and that really turned the tide of the game. That fake punt, both in the momentum swing and Fletcher Cox getting hurt on the play, to me, Zach, that's where this thing really unraveled for the Eagles. And the wind got out of their sails, and they couldn't get it back.
Well, the Saints scored at the end of that drive. It was the first touchdown, and the Eagles never scored again, by the way. But the Fletcher Cox injury, that came a little bit after. Okay, so that play happened. The Saints get the momentum back clearly. But even beyond that play, number one, Nick Foles' interception, that happened before that, didn't it? Yeah.
Got set up.
It set it up. So Nick Foles had a really bad. He targeted Zach Ertz down. It was weird because Zach Ertz is not a deep threat, and they don't. I've never seen them even try that before.
Yeah, and Zack talked about it after the game. Zach, he basically said that it was a high point ball. Typically, he goes up and he dunks on a guy, either swatting it away or comes down with the catch. 99 times out of 100, that's either his ball or an incompletion. And he thought that in that moment he needed to be a better defender. And again, if that play is incomplete, we might be talking about something a lot different.
Yeah, I agree. And So so that interception happens, it leads to all that other stuff. Those are two things that are connected, of course. But one thing that I just felt like just took all the wind out of the sails, even beyond those plays, was the people on this team were falling down like flies, man.
Yeah.
Brandon Brooks early in the game
tore his Achilles.
I mean, you knew it was serious because almost immediately the cart came out.
Yeah.
And a torn Achilles means that impacts whether he plays
play
next season.
Right.
Like that, there's probably a 6 to 9 to 10 month recovery process. And he's a big guy. We don't know how, like, the severity. It sounds like it's pretty bad.
Yep.
He tweeted out like some thoughts about it. So he goes down. You know, you have Fletcher Cox who's in and out. Michael Bennett went out. Chris Long and Brandon Graham all left at certain points. Russell Douglas left for a while
and
then came back.
His
eventually.
Replacement Hawkins,
who had played one snap for the Eagles this season.
One snap all year. They targeted. I don't think it's a coincidence that they targeted him on the 2-yard touchdown, which was the Saints, I believe, first touchdown of the game, and they targeted him twice late on the final drive of the second quarter when the Saints marched down and kicked a Will Lutz field goal to make it 14-10.
Yeah, and it didn't even stop there. You had before halftime, Alshon Jeffrey went into the locker room. We didn't know why. Maybe it was because his ribs were hurting. Maybe he needed something to help with that. Second half. Fletcher Cox leaves the game again down the stretch. Jason Peters leaves the game. But when Jason Peters left the game, they were down to no backup offensive lineman, by the way.
Yeah, scary.
Vaitai was in. Wisniewski was in. I mean, the offensive line is going to be one of the biggest concerns of this offseason. But you see these guys falling down like flies, and it just drained all the energy they had from that first quarter. And they had so much momentum, it just went away. And the defense did a pretty good job of still holding the Saints from scoring touchdowns over the rest of the way. Michael Thomas was pretty dominant. The running backs played really well.
Has a lot of missed tackles, though. Kamara had that 23-yard gain down the field on a swing pass that Malcolm Jenkins missed a tackle. Malcolm Jenkins gave up a touchdown to Kamara that was called back on a holding penalty. So this could have been a lot worse. But I think, Zach, the big picture takeaway here is the Saints look like they're on a collision course for the Super Bowl. And I think that when you look at this Eagles team, after they won the Super Bowl last year, there was that hangover for the first half of the year. Carson Wentz, I don't know that he was ever fully healthy this year. And I think that the questions that they faced early in the year are going to be a lot different than the questions they have to answer as an offseason approaches this year.
Yes, I think we should have our Nick Foles discussion at this point. Like we mentioned, he was fantastic in that first quarter.
Yep.
This was almost definitely the last game he's going to play for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yep.
I mean, you and I have talked. I think he makes a lot of sense for the Giants if they don't stick with Eli Manning.
If the Giants move on from Eli Manning, or if they go ahead and they draft Dwayne Haskins or plan to draft him, or if they plan to draft Kyler Murray or Daniel Jones out of Duke, if they plan on drafting a rookie quarterback, you look at Nick Foles coming in on a 2 or 3 year deal makes a perfect amount of sense for them. Familiar with the division. Obviously, he has a Super Bowl MVP under his belt, and up until today, a pretty rock solid playoff resume. But I think Foles, whether it's in New York, whether it's the Denver Broncos, whether it's the Cincinnati Bengals, the Miami Dolphins, there's going to be a market for Nick Foles, and the Eagles have to decide: do you trade him or do you cut bait? And I think the Eagles at this point would have to try to trade him and get something back for him. At least that makes the most sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's clear how much respect everybody in that locker room has for him. You know, there was a story last week that Mike Kay told where Jason Kelce said before the end, where Cody Parkey missed the field goal, Kelce made sure to go up to Nick and say, "Hey, if this is your last game, it's been an honor being your teammate," and all that. And we kind of had the same vibe in the locker room after. You know, Zach Ertz talked about how he was his first quarterback when he came out, and he just talked about how special and how confident and how what he brought to this team. And you can tell that they love Carson Wentz for sure, but they're sad to see this guy go.
Yeah, Lane Johnson told me that he thinks that Nick Foles is the consummate teammate. There's no ego about him, that he just goes out there and does his thing. He's a great teammate, a great friend, and he says he loves Carson Wentz, but he thought playing with Nick Foles and what they've been able to do and Foles' character is something that's really special. And, you know, look, Zach, you look at back in the day with the Chargers, it was Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers. They were on the same roster together. Wentz and Foles, I know you've overly invested in the quarterback position, but if the Eagles decide that they aren't 100% certain that Carson Wentz is going to be fully healthy week one, I don't know that they don't bring both of them back. I don't know that they're both on the roster in 2019.
I think Foles is probably done. I think a lot of it will be out of respect for him wanting to be a for sure full-time starter going forward and all that stuff.
If that's what he wants.
We'll
see how it plays out.
I mean, I mean, he has interest beyond football too. So he's going to have the most interesting off season of anybody. I mean, there was a report from Mike Freeman, I believe last week, where he said there are going to be teams fighting over themselves to get their hands on Nick Foles. There's going to be a lot of interest. If the Eagles hypothetically did try and franchise tag him and trade him, he mentioned the Raiders as like a team that would maybe even be willing to trade one of their first. It's a complicated process, but focusing more. Let's bring it back to this game, because this was kind of like a Nick Foles game in a nutshell, like of his career, because he had that first quarter where he looked like he was outplaying Drew Brees. He was one of his heroes. They went to high school together. They didn't go to they went to the same high school 10 years apart.
Right.
A little bit difference, but and then he looked pretty mediocre the rest of the way. He was off target. He had 2 interceptions that were pretty badly thrown. But I mean, the second one was Alshon's fault, of course, but he did not. But you still felt like they got the ball back on that final drive, and you're like, man, he's going to do it again, isn't he?
Especially when Will Lutz misses the field goal.
Yeah, it's like deja vu.
Exactly.
It's like Nick Foles. The magic finally went away.
It did.
And he's not the only one that this might be his last game with the Eagles. There are a few guys that either might retire or might leave in free agency that have been with this organization for a long time. You have,
I wrote about Jason Kelce after the game.
Jason Kelce, that's a big one. So there was a report, I believe, yesterday. That he was leaning towards retiring after this game. He did not say that was true. I mean, you talked to him more at length, but when I caught him towards the end, he was just saying, it would be hard to retire. He's because of your teammates and you love the game and you love all that, and it would be hard to go away from that. But he also pointed out, I'm 31. This was a really hard season for me physically. Yep. He never talked about how bad his knee. I think his knee injury was pretty bad this season.
And he stressed that he hasn't made a decision.
He hasn't made a decision.
I thought that was really telling, because he could have come out and said that, I'm under contract, I love the game, I love my teammates, and I'll be back. But like you alluded to, Zach, he basically came out and he said that, the player in you, the competitor in you, the teammate in you, that guy wants to play forever. But you have to think about your family. You have to think about the fact that you're getting older. And he mentioned Nick Foles wanting to potentially walk away from the game in 2016. He talked about Chris Long thinking about retirement over the last couple of years. And he said that this is going to be an ongoing thing from here on out. He's 31, and probably for the next couple of years, as long as he plays. If he plays next year, this is a situation where he's going to reassess and reevaluate after every year. So, arm twisted behind my back, I think Kelce is playing next year.
I agree.
But he didn't sound like that was something that's been set in stone, which makes this another fascinating element to this Eagles offseason.
It's going to be they have so many things up in the air. And another one thing he did say towards the end, he said something along the lines of, as of right now, I'm with the Eagles, and I'll be with the Eagles next year, and I'll think about my options in the offseason.
Yep.
But I walked away from that thinking he'll probably be back this year. Another guy who has talked a lot about his future, it almost seems like to the point where he's pretty much admitted he wasn't going to be back here, is Brandon Graham.
Yep.
I just don't see an extension of that marriage beyond this year, because number one, he didn't put up the sack numbers. I think he only had 4, but he was among the league leaders in pressures. He had a pretty good season. Pass rushers are at a premium. When you take away DeMarcus Lawrence and Ezekiel Ansah, who will both be free agents, they'll probably be franchise tagged and return their teams.
He's probably
the top guy in the market.
Yep.
And I think he's going to get a lot more money than the Eagles want to give. Even when it was just Howie Roseman and Andy Reid, they were never big on giving guys 30-plus long-term lucrative contracts, and that's what Graham's about to get. I spent quite a bit of time just talking with him about how his journey. He came to this team as a first-round pick. They picked him famously over Earl Thomas, and he was called a bust in the city of Philadelphia for a long time. Everybody was down on him.
Incorrectly, by the way.
Some guys it takes longer. That's why people need to be patient with Sidney Jones, by the way. But and each talked about he thinks about that all the time, all he's been through, and how he's about to head towards free agency. He said, "If this is my last game, I just want to enjoy every last moment I have with these guys." I mean, this is a guy, as opposed to Kelce, who's like hedging.
Right.
He's pretty much like, "This is my last one." Like he's saying it's his last one.
Yeah,
I don't think he's ever
the guy who's
he's made a big impact. He had the play of the Super Bowl. He won the Super Bowl for them.
And you want to talk about a turning point, Zach? He had the strip sack of Drew Brees. That if the Eagles had recovered that rather than it bouncing back to the Saints, game might have been completely different. And Graham's a guy who, I know it's a different regime in New York, but they expressed a lot of interest in Brandon Graham the last time he was a free agent before he re-signed with the Eagles. Giants only had 35 total sacks this year. We're among the league's fewest pressures on the quarterback in the NFL. It wouldn't shock me to see Brandon Graham draw interest from a team like the Giants, maybe the Oakland Raiders, maybe a team like the Jets or the Indianapolis Colts, who have hundreds of millions of dollars in cap space. But similar to Nick Foles, I think Brandon Graham is going to be a hot commodity on the open market.
Yes, and there's a lot of other guys. Jason Peters, he decided not to talk to the media. He played pretty well towards the end of the season, but it feels like he's still headed towards retirement. Yeah. Darren Sproles is another guy who'll consider retirement. Chris Long will consider retirement again. Jordan Hicks, the Eagles have a decision to make with him. He's pretty injury prone. They don't really value linebackers that much. Right. If he was willing to come for we'll break down all the incoming free agents, but even just getting beyond all that, I think even just based off things that happened in this game, you can be really optimistic about this Eagles team going forward. I know maybe people don't want to think too far ahead right now. This is a tough loss. The Eagles lost this game, and I think you kind of have to call this season a disappointment. I know it turned around and they became fun at the end, but they were a defending Super Bowl champion who only went 9-7, snuck into the playoffs, and only was able to get to the divisional round. So relative to what the expectations were, they were considered Super Bowl contenders leading into the season. This was a disappointment. Having said that, today you have, like we mentioned, Crevon LeBlanc. He's a guy they found on the waiver wire, cut by the Bears and the Lions this year, and he looks like a player. Rasul Douglas played phenomenally down the stretch. He's one of the best corners in the NFL. Avonte Maddox looks like a keeper. Michael Bennett, I wasn't sure what his future was beyond the season. Then the second half of the year, he was their best defensive lineman, not named Fletcher Cox, and he'll be back. I wouldn't be surprised if he pursued a raise on his contract. Nelson Aguilar, over the second half of the year, showed an ability as a deep threat.
Zach Ertz had a historic season.
Zach Ertz
set an NFL record for receptions by a tight end, and he's only going to get better. Right? I think that you've now just entered into the prime of Zach Ertz's career.
Yeah, and you have Dallas Goedert. One of the weirdly benefits of all the injuries they had is they force a lot of guys into the lineup. They had to be thrown into the fire maybe before they were ready, but now they went through all of those mistakes and they went through all the learning, and a lot of these guys look like players right now, and the future is really bright for them. Dallas Goedert, the Avonte Maddox, the Crevon LeBlancs. Trey Sullivan came on at the end of the year at safety. And you can feel really good about them going forward. They have some concerns. I think running back is a position they really need to hit. Offensive line, they're going to need to get some guys. They might need to get some receivers. They have a lot of guys.
Might need to get a safety depending on what happens with Rodney McLeod and his injury coming back.
Yeah, exactly. But, the big one coming back, and we've talked about this, would be Carson Wentz. And I think I know maybe people have soured on him for some reason because of all his injury issues, and he has to prove that he's not an injury-prone quarterback because he hasn't proven that yet so far. But
Don't forget, he was an MVP.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
The month of December last year, probably the MVP of the entire league, and I'm not convinced, Zach, that he was ever fully healthy when he returned. And we've both. We're not NFL quarterbacks, but we've played sports or we've hurt ourselves doing other things. And, if your knee is bothering you, you're going to favor your knee and you're going to throw something else out of whack. And that's what happened with Carson Wentz. I think the Eagles shut him down at the right time this year. I think they were wise not to make him active or have him come back to practice over the final month and a half of the season. And if you get Carson Wentz back fully rested, healthy, and ready to go, it's on him, and he has a lot to prove because he's going to be playing for that next quarterback contract, and that's another thing the Eagles are going to have to address, and it's a layer of this Nick Foles conversation. But if he's fully healthy next year, the Eagles' offense is going to be in a really good spot.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on this season, they went 9-7. They upset the way the season ended. They beat probably the best teams they played all year in that final stretch. They beat the Rams on the road. They beat the Texans at home. They beat the Bears on the road in the playoffs, and they played the Saints really well. They really had a chance to win this game. They if a few things go a little differently, which is kind of their season in a nutshell, they win this game against a team that we both believe is the Super Bowl favorite, even if they were a little sloppy today. I think for the season I predicted Saints over the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. That's looking pretty good right now.
Watch out for New England. But
right.
It's a conversation for you and Mike Kay as the postseason rolls along, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, we'll wrap it up on that note. Mike will be in Philly. He's in Philly right now. He'll be at the locker room clean out on Monday. Hope to make it back in time. We'll record some more podcasts in the coming weeks about the offseason, about what's coming forward. To wrap it up, the Eagles lost in the playoffs. Their season is over. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for listening all season. It's been a great time taking over the No-Huddle show from Lombardo and Elliott. And
nice job to you and Kay. You guys picked up the torch. You ran with it, and I think that it's great what you guys have been able to do this year.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Working with you guys this week.
It's been awesome. And we're gonna continue to grow the podcast, and make sure you comment on the next ones. We'll read some of your comments about your thoughts of the season. And thanks for listening, guys.